Picture this: a moonlit forest, the air thick with silence, when suddenly a pair of glowing eyes pierces the darkness. Something moves just beyond the edge of vision, something not quite human. Whether it's the snarl of a werewolf, the whisper of a vampire, or the creeping dread of a shapeshifter, these creatures haunt our stories for a reason. They aren't just figments of imagination, they're mirrors reflecting our deepest fears, carved into legend across time and continents. Why is it that cultures separated by oceans and centuries all conjure up such eerily similar monsters? The answer lies in the shadows of the human psyche, where myth and fear intertwine. From the bloodthirsty vampires of Eastern Europe to the skin-walking spirits of Navajo lore, these legendary beings embody the anxieties that keep us awake at night: fear of the unknown, of death, of losing control. They're the embodiments of what we don't understand, the dangers we can't name, the taboos we dare not break. And yet, there's something thrilling about confronting them, about giving shape to the formless terrors that lurk in the dark. That's the power of myth. It takes the intangible and makes it real, wrapping our fears in flesh and bone so we can face them or flee from them in the safety of a story. This is a journey into the heart of legend, where we'll trace the threads of fear that bind humanity together. We'll uncover how the same primal dread manifests in a Japanese yokai, a Celtic banshee, or an African Inkaniamba, creatures that seem worlds apart but whisper the same unsettling truths. Along the way, we'll unravel the psychology behind these myths, the historical moments that birthed them, and the cultural taboos they enforce. So stay with me, because by the end, you'll see these monsters not just as tales to scare children, but as windows into the collective nightmares of humankind. The shadows are waiting. Let's step into them together. Long before science could explain thunderstorms or eclipses, ancient storytellers wove myths to make sense of a terrifying world. These weren't just campfire tales, they were survival tools, psychological armor against everything from plagues to famine. Take the Greek chimera, that fire-breathing lion-goat-serpent hybrid. To the ancients, it wasn't merely a monster, it was the embodiment of nature's unpredictability, a symbol of the chaos lurking beyond human control. Or consider Japan's Oni, those horned ogres wielding iron clubs. They weren't just boogeymen, they were morality tales in flesh and blood, punishing those who broke societal rules. Carl Jung called these recurring figures archetypes, universal symbols etched into humanity's subconscious. Joseph Campbell saw them as the bones of every hero's journey, but they're equally the scaffolding of our nightmares. What's fascinating is how these myths function like cultural X-rays, revealing a society's deepest fractures. Vampires, they thrived in eras where disease spread unseen, reflecting fears of contamination and forbidden desire. Werewolves, often emerging during periods of social upheaval, they mirror our terror of losing humanity, of becoming the beast within. Now flip the lens to modern myths. Zombies shamble through our screens not by accident, but because they embody fears of pandemics and mindless consumerism. AI run-amok stories, they're just Silicon Valley's version of the golem myth, cautionary tales about creations outgrowing their creators. The monsters change costumes, but the fears stay hauntingly familiar. So what's next? If myths are shaped by the landscapes that birth them, then deserts, forests, and oceans don't just house monsters, they sculpt them. The water-dwelling Inkaniamba of Zulu legend isn't the same as Scotland's Loch Ness monster, because the dangers of an African river aren't the same as the mysteries of a Highland loch. Geography writes the rules of fear, and every culture reads between different lines. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, frozen wilderness where the wind howls like a living thing and the snow hides footprints too large to be human. This is the domain of the Yeti, a creature born from the sheer isolation and unforgiving cold of the Himalayas. Every landscape writes its own nightmares, sculpting monsters from the very elements that challenge survival. In the dense, shadowy forests of Eastern Europe, the Leshy rules, a shape-shifting spirit woven from the whispers of ancient trees. It's no accident that this trickster mirrors the disorientation of losing one's way in an endless woodland. Meanwhile, in the scorching deserts of Arabia, the ghoul lurks, a predator of the barren wastes where thirst and mirages blur reality. These beings aren't random, they're fear made tangible, tailored to the environments that birthed them. Water, too, has its own lexicon of terrors. The Scottish Kelpie doesn't just drown its victims, it lures them into lochs with a beauty as deceptive as the currents beneath the surface. Half a world away, the Maori speak of the Taniwa, serpentine guardians of rivers and coasts, embodying both the bounty and the peril of the waters they inhabit. Even the most remote islands have their own versions. Japan's kappa, a frog-like demon lurking in ponds, or the Caribbean's lusca, a monstrous octopus said to drag sailors into underwater caves. What unites them isn't just their aquatic nature, but the way they crystallize the dangers of their specific waters, whether it's the Kelpie's icy grip or the Taniwa's tempestuous wrath. But why do these creatures vary so wildly from place to place? Look to the land itself. Volcanic regions spawn fire demons like the Philippine aswang, while earthquake-prone areas give rise to giants that shake the earth, such as the Norse Jörmungandr. Even the absence of something can birth a myth. The vast, empty steppes of Mongolia gave us the wind-born Olmas, a wildman said to vanish like a dust devil. Isolation amplifies fear and scarcity sharpens it. In places where survival hangs by a thread, monsters become explanations and warnings. Here's the chilling truth: these legends aren't just about the land, they're about us. The Yeti reflects the dread of being alone in a white void. The Leshy embodies the forest's indifference to human trespass, and the ghoul preys on those foolish enough to wander the desert unprepared. They're environmental morality tales, reminding us that nature isn't just a backdrop, it's an active, often hostile character in our stories. So what about your homeland? Is there a creature that haunts its rivers, mountains, or skies? A beast whose story is inseparable from the soil it walks on? Because as long as there are uncharted shadows in the world, we'll keep filling them with monsters, each one a mirror, not just of the land, but of the people who fear it. And as societies change, so too do their nightmares, which brings us to the next chapter of this story: how these creatures don't just adapt to landscapes, but to the shifting fears of the humans who imagine them. There's something uniquely unsettling about a creature that wears a familiar face, a friend, a neighbor, even a lover, only to reveal itself as something monstrous. Shapeshifters, from the werewolves of European folklore to the fox spirits of East Asia, tap into one of humanity's oldest fears: betrayal. These legends don't just scare us, they weaponize our trust, turning the people we know into strangers in the blink of an eye. Consider the Norse trickster Loki, who slips between forms as easily as he slips between alliances, or the Navajo skinwalkers, said to steal the bodies of those they envy. These stories thrive in societies where social hierarchies are rigid, where a single act of deception can unravel entire communities. History is littered with moments where this fear boiled over into real-world terror. During the witch trials of medieval Europe, accusations of shape-shifting women transforming into cats or wolves to stalk their enemies were enough to condemn hundreds to the stake. It wasn't just about magic, it was about the panic of not knowing who to trust. Even today, the idea lingers in our collective subconscious. Why else do werewolf stories resurge during times of political unrest, or vampire myths flourish in eras of social secrecy? These creatures are metaphors for the masks people wear, the hidden agendas we suspect but can't prove. The kitsune of Japanese folklore offers a fascinating twist. These fox spirits don't just deceive, they reflect the duality of human nature itself. Some are benevolent, guiding lost travelers. Others are vengeful, seducing and ruining those who cross them. Their shifting forms mirror the complexity of trust, how love can turn to betrayal, how kindness can hide cruelty. It's no coincidence that kitsune tales often center on marriages or friendships fractured by revelation. The moment the mask slips and the person you thought you knew never existed at all. So here's the chilling question these myths force us to confront. In a world where appearances lie, how do we ever truly know someone? The fear isn't just about monsters, it's about the vulnerability of being wrong about those closest to us. And if shapeshifters embody the terror of hidden malice, then the undead represent something even more primal, the violation of nature's laws. Because what could be more unsettling than the dead refusing to stay dead? The dead are supposed to stay dead, that's the one rule nature promises. Yet every culture has its own version of the corpse that refuses to rot, the body that won't stay buried. From the blood-starved Jiangxi of China, hopping stiffly in their yellow talismans, to the hollow-eyed zombies of Haitian voodoo, these undead legends share a bone-deep truth. Humanity's terror of mortality isn't just about dying. It's about what comes after. The Jiangxi, with its papery skin and insatiable thirst for life force, mirrors ancient fears of improper burials, that without the right rituals, the dead might return hungry. Meanwhile, the Haitian zombie isn't a mindless flesh-eater but something far more haunting. A soul enslaved, a body robbed of free will. Born from the trauma of colonial brutality, these creatures embody the ultimate violation, not just death, but the theft of one's very self. History shows how these fears erupt into panic. 18th century Europe saw vampire hysteria sweep villages, with corpses exhumed and staked at the slightest rumor of unnatural preservation. Was it disease muting the signs of decomposition? Perhaps. But the deeper terror was the idea that death wasn't a boundary at all, that the grave couldn't contain what lay within. Fast forward to modern pandemics and watch zombie narratives surge anew. Contagion films and shows thrive not because we believe in the undead, but because they crystallize our dread of invisible, unstoppable spread. The fear that a single bite could unravel the fragile order of society. What's chilling is how these stories evolve without losing their core. The vampire, once a bloated peasant revenant in Slavic lore, became Bram Stoker's aristocratic Dracula, reflecting Victorian anxieties about class and sexuality. Today's zombies shuffle through malls, literalizing consumerism's mindless hunger. The undead don't just scare us, they morph to wear whatever nightmare fits the era. So why this obsession with creatures that cheat decay? Because they force us to stare at the one thing we can't outrun, our own mortality. They're the shadow at the edge of every funeral, the whisper that asks, what if death isn't the end? What if it's worse? And as long as that question lingers, we'll keep telling stories of the undead, not to escape our fear, but to give it a shape we can at least try to outsmart. Now imagine a different kind of terror, not the dead who walk, but the things that were never alive to begin with. The ones that lurk where the light fails, waiting in the blind spots of our vision. There's a reason children clutch their blankets tighter when the lights go out. Darkness has always been the canvas for our worst imaginings. The boogeyman doesn't lurk in broad daylight. He thrives under beds and in closets, a formless terror that parents invoke to keep little ones from wandering at night. But this isn't just child's play. The Filipino aswang, a shapeshifter that preys on the unborn, slips through villages under cover of night, while the Germanic Alp rides sleepers' chests like a living nightmare, stealing breath and sowing dread. These creatures aren't random. They're carefully crafted instruments of control, weaving societal warnings into the fabric of bedtime stories. History reveals how potent these tales can be. In medieval Europe, parents whispered of the Krampus to frighten children into obedience, a horned beast who dragged the unruly to the underworld. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, elders spoke of the aswang's taste for disobedient kids, a chilling reinforcement of family hierarchy. Even today, these stories linger. Think of the urban legends swapped at sleepovers, the ones that make you double-check the locks or avoid that creaky stair. The monsters change names, but their purpose remains: to turn the abstract fear of the unknown into something tangible, something we can warn each other about. Psychology explains why darkness magnifies these fears. When visibility drops, our brains fill the void with projections, shadows become figures, rustling leaves morph into footsteps. It's called pareidolia, the tendency to see patterns where none exist, and it's why every culture has a monster that thrives in the dark. The Navajo speak of the skinwalkers who move unseen between moonlit mesas. The Welsh tell of the gwilgi, a spectral black dog whose eyes glow like embers in the night. These beings exploit our hardwired survival instincts, the ones that once kept our ancestors alert to predators lurking beyond the firelight. But here's the twist: these nighttime terrors often reveal more about the storytellers than the listeners. The aswang's association with pregnancy mirrors taboos around childbirth and female autonomy. The Alps' suffocating presence echoes ancient fears of sleep paralysis, when the mind wakes before the body, trapping victims in helpless dread. Even the boogeyman, that universal disciplinarian, reflects the power dynamics between generations, a reminder that fear is the oldest tool for teaching obedience. So what childhood monster still sends a shiver down your spine? Because lurking beneath these tales is a truth as old as storytelling itself. We don't just fear the dark. We fear what the dark conceals, the things we can't name, the threats we can't see coming. And as our ancestors mapped the world, pushing boundaries into uncharted lands, that fear simply found new shadows to inhabit. Beyond the edges of the known, where maps once marked, here be dragons. Another breed of monster awaited ones that didn't hide under beds, but in the vast, unexplored wilderness where no stories had yet been told. For centuries, blank spaces on maps weren't just empty, they were screaming with possibility. Where cartographers drew swirling sea monsters or scribbled, "Here be dragons," they weren't decorating, they were confessing humanity's terror of the uncharted. Take the kraken, that colossal cephalopod of Nordic legend, said to drag entire ships into the abyss. Its origins, the unpredictable fury of the North Atlantic, where storms could swallow vessels whole, leaving no trace. Sailors didn't just fear the kraken, they needed it a tangible explanation for the sea's merciless whims. Similarly, the mapingari of Amazonian folklore isn't just a towering, one-eyed beast. It's the jungle's revenge incarnate, a warning to outsiders who dared exploit lands they didn't understand. Its stench alone could paralyze hunters, a metaphor for the suffocating dread of stepping into a world where every vine might conceal venom or quicksand. The age of exploration poured gasoline on these fears. When Ferdinand Magellan's crew chronicled their voyage, they didn't just describe storms, they wrote of serpents as long as ships coiling beneath the waves. These weren't lies, they were the language of limitlessness, the mind's attempt to process horizons with no end. Even the desert, that vast and lifeless expanse, birthed its own nightmares. The Mongolian deathworm, said to lurk beneath the Gobi sands, isn't just a creature, it's the embodiment of the desert's silent lethality. Nomads spoke of its electric venom and corrosive spray, a poetic exaggeration of the very real dangers: dehydration, sandstorms, and the sheer disorientation of a landscape with no landmarks. What's chilling is how these legends mirror the psychology of exploration. The kraken thrived in an era when ships vanished without explanation. The deathworm flourished where travelers disappeared into the dunes. These monsters weren't just stories, they were placeholders for the unknowable, a way to personify the existential threat of terra incognita. And here's the twist: we still do it. Modern blank spaces might be the deep ocean or outer space, but the pattern repeats. The Mariana Trench, barely explored, already spawns rumors of megasharks and bioluminescent leviathans. Mars conspiracy theories whisper of buried cities and alien watchers. The human mind still fills voids with teeth and eyes because emptiness is more terrifying than any monster. But when the unknown isn't a place but a collapse, when the map isn't blank but burning, that's when the most haunting creatures emerge. Societies on the brink don't fear the edge of the world, they fear the center giving way. Enter the beasts of apocalypse, the Norse Jörmungandr, circling the earth until it bites its own tail and brings Ragnarök, the Hindu Kalki, the horseman of annihilation. These aren't just doomsday harbingers, they're the nightmares of farmers who survived plagues, of cities that crumbled into dust. They give form to the unthinkable. What happens when the systems we rely on, crops, governments, gods, fail us utterly? So consider this: if ancient sailors feared the kraken because the ocean was their unknown, what does our dread of AI overlords or climate catastrophes say about ours? The monsters evolve, but the fear remains: the terror of stepping off the map, or worse, watching the map itself dissolve beneath our feet. And as history shows, when the world shakes, the things that crawl out of the cracks are rarely the ones we expect. When the world teeters on the brink, the monsters grow larger, not just in size but in scope. Take Fenrir, the colossal wolf of Norse myth, whose howls would shake the foundations of Yggdrasil itself when Ragnarök arrived. This wasn't just a beast, it was the embodiment of chaos, a force so vast it could swallow the sun. Half a world away, the Aztecs feared the Tzitzimitl, skeletal star demons who would descend during solar eclipses, signaling the end of the fifth sun. What's striking isn't just the scale of these creatures, but their timing. They didn't slink into stories during eras of peace. They erupted when societies were already trembling, during Viking raids or the collapse of Mesoamerican empires. Apocalyptic myths are never just about destruction. They're about the unraveling of order, the terror of watching everything you know dissolve into chaos. Fast forward to today, and the patterns hold. Our modern doomsdays, where different masks climate change envisioned as a rising serpent, AI rebellions framed as silicon golems run amok, but the heartbeat of the fear remains the same. The Mayan prophecy of 2012 wasn't just a calendar glitch, it was a cultural echo of the Tzitzimittl's return, a reminder that even stars can betray us. And when scientists warn of ecological tipping points, it's hard not to hear Fenrir's chains straining in the background. These stories persist because they do something vital. They give shape to the shapeless dread of systemic collapse. A wolf is something you can fight, even if it's cosmic in scale. But abstract concepts like environmental degradation, those need teeth to make us pay attention. Consider the Hopi prophecy of the blue star Kitsune, a celestial sign marking humanity's final test. It's not a random myth, it's a narrative scaffold, a way to frame the unthinkable as something with stages, warnings, and, crucially, choices. That's the secret function of these beasts, their narrative pressure valves, letting cultures process existential fears through storytelling. The Babylonian Tiamat, a primordial dragon of saltwater chaos, didn't just represent destruction, she symbolized the old order giving way to the new, unnecessary if brutal rebirth. So what would your culture's apocalypse monster look like? Would it be a swarm of nanomachines, a genetically engineered plague, or something as ancient as a dragon with a nuclear glow? Because these creatures aren't just relics, they're evolving alongside us, morphing to embody whatever threatens the fragile systems we depend on. And if history's any guide, the next great upheaval won't just birth new fears, it'll birth new monsters to wear them. Yet for all their terror, these beings serve another purpose, one far more intimate than cosmic annihilation. Beyond heralding the end of worlds, monsters have always been the enforcers of rules, the guardians of taboos. They don't just reflect what we fear, they police what we dare. Every society has its line in the sand, the rules so sacred, breaking them summons something far worse than prison. Enter the Furies of Greek myth, those whip-wielding sisters with serpents for hair, who hunted oath-breakers and kinslayers with divine fury. They weren't just monsters, they were the ancient world's ultimate moral enforcers, the living consequences for sins no human court could touch. Half a globe away, the ghoul of Arabic folklore served a similar purpose, lurking in graveyards to punish thieves and desecrators. Its very existence a warning. Some lines, once crossed, invite horrors beyond mortal reckoning. These creatures didn't just frighten, they codified ethics into the collective imagination, turning abstract right and wrong into something with claws and hunger. Now contrast that with Japan's Zashiki Warashi, the childlike spirits who bless homes that honor tradition, but bring misfortune to those who neglect their ancestors. Where the Furies rend flesh, these little guardians nudge with gentle hauntings, a teacup out of place, a cold draft where none should be. It's a fascinating spectrum. Some monsters bludgeon with terror, while others whisper through unease. The Celtic Kelpie falls hard on the brutal end, a beautiful horse that lures riders onto its back, only to drag them into the depths, a stark metaphor for the perils of trusting pretty surfaces. There's a Welsh tale about a greedy lord who hoarded grain during a famine, ignoring his people's starvation. One night, the Jarachwy Ribbon, a banshee-like hag with bat wings, perched on his windowsill, whispering his name in a voice like cracking ice. By dawn, he was found dead, his storehouses thrown open to the starving. Poetic justice served not by lawmakers but by legend, which makes you wonder, do we still invent monsters to police behavior? Look at modern urban legends like the Hooked Man or Bloody Mary, stories teens whisper at sleepovers, reinforcing taboos about trespassing or vanity. Even ransomware hackers today adopt monstrous personas, their screen names evoking digital bogeymen. The packaging changes, but the purpose remains: fear as social glue. And nowhere is this more revealing than in the female monsters crafted by patriarchal societies. The Lamia, who devours children because jealousy twisted her love. The La Llorona, doomed to weep for the babies she drowned in grief. These aren't random horrors, they're cautionary tales weaponizing womanhood itself, punishing transgressive femininity with monstrous transformations. Behind every fanged smile or wailing ghost, there's a whisper, stay in line or this could be you. But what happens when the monsters escape their moral cages? When they stop punishing sinners and start reflecting the sins of those who made them, that's when legends take a darker turn, not as lessons but as accusations. There's a particular cruelty in the way myths twist female power into something monstrous. Medusa, with her serpent hair and petrifying gaze, wasn't always a monster. She was a woman violated by Poseidon in Athena's temple, then punished for the crime committed against her. Her transformation into a Gorgon isn't just a curse, it's a warning. A woman's rage, her trauma, her very presence can be weaponized against her. The same pattern echoes in La Llorona, the weeping ghost of Latin American folklore, doomed to wander riversides for drowning her children in a fit of grief or vengeance, depending on the telling. Her story isn't just tragic, it's a cautionary tale about maternal failure, a societal fear distilled into a spectral figure. Even Baba Yaga, the iron-toothed hag of Slavic tales, straddles the line between wisdom and wickedness, her hut on chicken legs a metaphor for the untamed, unhouseable nature of elderly women who refuse to fade quietly into the background. These myths don't just scare us, they police gender. The succubus, a demon who seduces men in their sleep, reflects male anxiety about desire, a way to blame the supernatural for lust rather than confront it as human nature. Meanwhile, the harpy, a half-bird creature who snatches food from the wicked, embodies the terror of female hunger, whether literal or metaphorical. The message is clear: a woman who takes, who demands, who refuses to be small, is a threat in need of containment. But feminists have long dissected these narratives. Scholar Barbara Creed coined the term monstrous feminine to describe how horror films and myths frame female biology, menstruation, childbirth, menopause as inherently grotesque. Medusa's snakes, they mirror the fear of female hair, of untamed bodies. La Llorona's drowning act, a grotesque inversion of nurturing, a mother who consumes instead of protects. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're blueprints for how societies regulate women through fear. Yet something remarkable is happening. Modern retellings are reclaiming these figures. Margaret Atwood's The Penelopiad reframes Odysseus's wife not as a patient saint, but a woman seething with justified rage. The novel Circe transforms the Witch of Aea from a villain into a survivor, her magic a response to centuries of exile and abuse. Even Baba Yaga gets a redemption arc in contemporary fiction, her hut becoming a sanctuary for wayward girls rather than a trap. These revisions aren't just corrections, they're rebellions, proof that monsters can be unmade. So which female monster deserves her story rewritten? Maybe it's Lilith, Adam's first wife in Jewish folklore, who refused to lie beneath him and was demonized for it. Or perhaps the sirens, whose songs weren't about luring sailors to their deaths, but about the irresistible pull of art itself. The answer depends on which fear we're ready to confront next, because the line between monster and woman has always been drawn by those in power. And if female monsters reveal the terror of blurred gender roles, then hybrid creatures expose an even deeper anxiety, the horror of losing humanity altogether. What happens when the boundary between human and beast isn't just crossed but erased? Centaurs gallop through Greek myths with the bodies of horses and the torsos of warriors, but are they beasts or men? The answer unsettles us because it's both and neither. Hybrid creatures like these aren't just fantastical mashups, they're walking paradoxes, embodiments of the fear that humanity is just a thin veneer over something wilder. Consider the Sphinx of Egypt with its lion's body and human face, crouching at the edge of the desert like a sentinel between civilization and chaos. It doesn't just guard pyramids, it guards the boundary between what we are and what we might become. The Minotaur takes this dread deeper, literally. Trapped in a labyrinth beneath Crete, this bull-headed monstrosity isn't just a prisoner of stone, it's a metaphor for the maze of primal instincts we all carry inside. The artist George Frederick Watts captured this perfectly in his haunting painting, The Minotaur, where the creature grips the labyrinth walls, its eyes hollow with something between rage and sorrow. It's a mirror held up to our own struggles, the fear that rage, lust, or hunger could eclipse our humanity if we wander too far into our personal labyrinths. Mermaids, too, play this dual role. In some tales, they're enchanting guides, like the Celtic Selkies who shed their sealskins to walk among humans. In others, they're the sirens of Homer, luring sailors to drown with voices too beautiful to resist. Their split nature, half fish, half human, reflects our own tension between logic and desire, between the pull of the deep and the safety of shore. So what hybrid would haunt us today? Maybe a creature woven from Wi-Fi signals and flesh, symbolizing our addiction to screens, or a gene-spliced chimera, echoing anxieties about CRISPR and designer babies. Hybrids evolve because our fears do. They're the shape-shifting shadows of whatever threatens our sense of self. And if these beings embody the terror of blurred identity, then another class of monsters preys on an even more visceral fear, the horror of the body turning against itself. When plagues swept through medieval Europe, they didn't just bring death, they birthed legends of the Nosferatu, corpses bloated with disease, rising to spread infection with every touch. The connection was literal. Outbreaks of tuberculosis and porphyria, with their symptoms of wasting and light sensitivity, likely inspired vampire myths. But the disease-monster link runs deeper. The Japanese Nyor Onna, a serpent woman with a face frozen in agony, was said to appear near rivers during epidemics, her presence a harbinger of suffering. In West Africa, the Abiku spirit's children doomed to die young and be reborn in cycles mirror the heartbreak of infant mortality. These creatures don't just represent illness, they personify the helplessness of watching your own flesh betray you, of becoming a stranger in your skin. Today's pandemics have their own monsters. Zombie films surged during the AIDS crisis, reflecting fears of contagion and social collapse. More recently, COVID-19 spawned online legends of super spreaders, depicted as shadowy figures breathing miasma. It's the same old terror in new packaging, the dread that the person beside you or even your own body could become the vector of your doom. From hybrid horrors to plague-born specters, these myths share a thread, their warnings about boundaries breached. Whether it's the line between human and beast or health and decay, monsters thrive in the cracks where control slips away. And as long as those cracks exist, we'll keep filling them with creatures that give form to our deepest, most unspoken fears. When the Black Death swept through Europe, it didn't just leave corpses in its wake, it birthed monsters. Townspeople whispered of the plague doctor, that masked figure with a beak full of herbs, who seemed to appear wherever the sickness spread. Was he a healer or a harbinger? Some believed his very presence cursed the air. Others swore they saw him sketching crosses on doors hours before families fell ill. This wasn't just superstition, it was desperation distilled into myth. Without germ theory, how else could they explain why some homes were spared while others were wiped out? The plague doctor became a walking symbol of contagion's cruel randomness, his bird-like mask reflecting the terror of breathing the same air as death itself. Half a world away, Jewish communities grappled with their own embodiment of suffering, the Dybbuk. Unlike the plague doctor, this wasn't a physical creature but a restless spirit, said to cling to the living like a second skin. Dybbuk possession stories surged during outbreaks, with victims displaying feverish delirium or unexplained wounds. Rabbis would perform exorcisms, not just to banish the spirit, but to restore communal order, because if disease couldn't be cured, at least its cause could be named and cast out. Here's the chilling parallel. Both myths reveal how societies personify epidemics. When suffering has no face, we paint one on it. History brims with these blame-shifting tales. In 1623, the German town of Bedburg accused a farmer named Peter Stump of being a werewolf, claiming his curses brought famine and fever. His trial records describe howling winds coinciding with his executions as if nature itself confirmed the lie. Fast forward to 2010, and the same pattern repeats in zombie films like World War Z, where Patient Zero is chased like a modern-day witch. The labels change: werewolf, debug, super spreader, but the impulse remains: pin the chaos on something you can see, something you can burn. Now consider COVID-19. Memes of the coronavirus monster flooded social media, a spiky orb straight out of a sci-fi nightmare. Anti-Asian hate crimes spiked as the virus was racialized, echoing the way medieval Jews were scapegoated for plagues. Even our language turned predatory. We combat variants, track exposures, and quarantine the sick as if they're threats rather than victims. The monsters haven't vanished, they've just traded cloaks for lab coats. But if plague myths reveal our fear of invisible enemies, then the next layer cuts deeper: the terror of the other who walks among us. Because when societies fracture, monsters don't just reflect disease, they embody the strangers we're taught to distrust. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Every culture has its wild men, those figures lurking just beyond the firelight, covered in matted hair, speaking in grunts or not at all. Europe's Woodwos and the Middle East's Gog and Magog weren't just stories, they were psychological weapons, turning entire groups into subhuman threats. Medieval maps marked distant lands with these hairy brutes, framing outsiders as barely civilized, their differences exaggerated into monstrosity. This wasn't harmless folklore, it was propaganda, priming societies to fear and conquer whoever lay beyond their borders. The Orientalist dragon followed the same blueprint. While European dragons were often solitary beasts to be slain, Asian depictions like China's benevolent lung were twisted by colonial narratives into symbols of savage cunning, justifying exploitation under the guise of taming chaos. But contrast this with Hinduism's Garuda, a majestic eagle man who carries the god Vishnu. Here, the hybrid isn't a menace but a protector, his otherness a mark of divinity. The difference is stark. One culture's monster is another's guardian. Post-colonial scholar Homi Bhabha called this process othering, the way dominant groups reduce outsiders to caricatures, stripping them of complexity until they're little more than boogeymen. Take the Zulu legend of the Tikalosh, a dwarf-like creature blamed for misfortunes. During apartheid, white settlers weaponized the myth, portraying black communities as superstitious and backward, their fears proof of inferiority. The Tikalosh wasn't just a folkloric figure, it became a colonial tool, reinforcing the lie that some people were closer to monsters than men. Folktales often codify these prejudices. In 19th century America, newspapers ran lurid stories of alligator men. In the Everglades, mixed-race outlaws supposedly lurking in swamps, their very existence framed as unnatural. These weren't just campfire tales, they rationalized violence against marginalized groups, turning systemic fears into flesh and blood villains. Even today, the pattern persists. Migrants are depicted as hordes, political opponents as vermin, and dissenting voices as infected with dangerous ideas. The language of monstering hasn't faded, it's simply swapped scales for slogans. So who wears the monster's skin in our era? Look to the algorithms that flatten entire cultures into clickbait, or the AI-generated deepfakes that twist reality into grotesque parodies. The wild men of old now lurk in comment sections, their dehumanization digitized but no less destructive. Yet just as technology amplifies these fears, it births new ones because every age gets the monsters it deserves. And in an era of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, our deepest anxieties are shifting from the wilderness outside to the machines among us. The moment humans learned to shape clay into tools, we also shaped our first nightmares of creation gone wrong. Enter the golem of Jewish folklore, a hulking figure molded from riverbank mud, brought to life with sacred words, only to turn on its makers when the magic spiraled out of control. This wasn't just a monster, it was the original cautionary tale of playing God, a theme that would echo through every industrial revolution. Fast forward to the clanking automatons of the Victorian era, when factory smokestacks belched progress and paranoia in equal measure. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein didn't just give us a stitched-together abomination, it gave voice to the dread that science could birth horrors as easily as cures. But nothing sharpened this fear like the rise of machines. The 20th century swapped magic incantations for lines of code, and suddenly, our monsters wore chrome. The Terminator wasn't just a killer robot, it was the golem upgraded for the microchip age, a relentless force that couldn't be bargained with or stopped. Science fiction writers like Isaac Asimov saw this coming. His 3 laws of robotics weren't just plot devices, but desperate safeguards against the very real terror of creations outthinking their creators. Even steampunk, with its brass and gear aesthetics, reimagined dragons as steam-powered behemoths, their wings replaced with pistons, their fire-breathing swapped for scorching exhaust. The message was clear: every technological leap comes with its own breed of mechanical beast. Today's nightmares speak in algorithms. AI isn't just a tool anymore, it's the blank slate we project our deepest anxieties onto. When chatbots hallucinate false information or deepfakes mimic loved ones' voices, it's not Skynet we fear, it's the uncanny valley of trust eroding 1 pixel at a time. Sci-fi author Ted Chiang put it best: the real danger isn't that machines will develop consciousness, but that we'll treat them as if they have. Think about that next time you yell at your smart speaker or thank a chatbot for customer service. We're already anthropomorphizing the wires, priming ourselves to see monsters or messiahs in the static. Yet for all the dystopian visions, there's a flip side. Cyberpunk didn't just give us rogue AIs, it gave us Ghost in the Shell's Major Motoko, a cyborg who wrestles with her humanity rather than discarding it. Even Frankenstein's creature, for all its rage, wept over its creator's corpse. These stories hint at something unexpected. What if our creations aren't destined to destroy us but to redefine us? So what's the tech monster that haunts your late-night scrolling? A viral AI that writes 2 perfect novels, a quantum computer that cracks reality's code, because the line between tool and terror has always been thinner than we admit. And just as the golem's clay could be both protector and destroyer, today's machines hold the same double-edged potential, which brings us to the untold chapter of this story, the monsters we don't flee from but rally behind. The ones who don't lurk under beds but stand guard at the gates. Not all monsters bare their teeth, some stand sentinel. Take the Killin, China's celestial chimera, with the body of a deer, the tail of an ox, and scales shimmering like coins. This creature doesn't stalk or snarl. It treads so lightly, grass springs back unbroken beneath its hooves. Spotting one heralds the birth of a sage or the rise of a just ruler. In one Ming dynasty tale, a Killin appeared during a drought, its arrival coinciding with rains that saved a starving village. Here's the twist: its horns could pierce evil hearts, yet it harmed no one, proof that power need not be cruel to be mighty. Then there's the griffin, that lion-eagle hybrid guarding Scythian gold in Herodotus's histories. Unlike dragons hoarding treasure for greed, griffins stood as divine custodians, their very presence a warning against theft. A Byzantine manuscript tells of one shielding a wounded soldier from scavengers, its wings casting shade like a living banner of mercy. These beings embody a radical idea: that monsters can be mirrors of our better selves, reflecting virtues we've forgotten: compassion, justice, the courage to protect. But balance is key. For every Killen, there's a Cerberus, the three-headed hound snarling at the gates of Hades. His role isn't evil, but necessary, keeping souls from escaping the underworld, maintaining cosmic order. He's a reminder that even guardians have edges, that some boundaries must be ruthless to mean anything. The Maori Taniwa straddles this line perfectly. These river spirits drown the reckless but guide fishermen to safety, their moods as changeable as the currents they command. So can a monster ever be purely good? Perhaps not. Even the kindest myths carry shadows. The Killen flees at the scent of violence. Griffins, though noble, will rend poachers limb from limb. Their morality isn't human, it's wilder, older, bound to laws we barely grasp. And maybe that's the point. These beings don't exist to coddle us, but to test us. Which brings us to their most profound role, the monsters that don't guard places but transitions, the ones waiting at the threshold between childhood and adulthood, ignorance and wisdom. In West Africa, the Yoruba speak of the Egba, a small, weeping spirit carrying a magical mat. To steal its mat brings wealth, but also unshakable nightmares. It's a rite of passage in disguise. Do you choose comfort at the cost of your peace? The Native American Wendigo, born from starvation's desperation, asks a grimmer question: how much hunger can you endure before you become the hunger itself? These aren't just stories, they're trials by narrative, forcing the young to confront the weight of choices before life forces their hand. Even modern pop culture echoes this. The Pokémon Scyther, with its scythe-like arms, isn't just a fighter. It's a test for trainers learning when to battle and when to show mercy. The Sorting Hat in Harry Potter, though not a monster, plays a similar role. A magical arbiter exposing children to their own potential for light or darkness. The pattern's universal, whether it's a Maori youth facing the Taniwa's judgment or a suburban teen surviving a slasher flick's final girl trope. Monsters are the gatekeepers of growing up. So the next time you meet a beast in a tale, ask not just what it destroys, but what it demands. Is it a trial, a lesson, a mirror? Because the most enduring monsters aren't the ones we slay, they're the ones that change us. And sometimes the scariest thing they guard isn't a treasure or a throne, but the person we're afraid to become. Every hero's story begins with a monster, not just as an enemy, but as a rite of passage. Beowulf didn't merely slay Grendel, he proved his worth as a leader, transforming from a warrior into a legend. Perseus faced Medusa not just to save a kingdom, but to claim his place among the gods. These trials weren't random acts of violence, they were the ancient world's version of a graduation ceremony, where the monster served as the final exam. Across cultures, the pattern repeats. To become an adult, you must first confront the thing that terrifies you most. Take the Maasai lion hunt, where young men of the tribe track and face a lion with nothing but a spear and their courage. The lion isn't just an animal, it's a symbol of untamed nature, a test of whether the hunter has mastered his own fear. Succeed, and he's no longer a boy, but a Moran, a warrior. Fail, and the consequences are unthinkable. This ritual mirrors the psychological journey Carl Jung called facing the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny or fear, the anger, the lust, the primal instincts we bury beneath civility. The monster, whether literal or metaphorical, forces us to stare into that darkness and emerge transformed. Even in modern life, the archetype persists. Think of the teenager sneaking out to a haunted house on a dare, or the college freshman surviving their first all-nighter. The monsters change forms, a looming deadline, a first heartbreak, a public speech, but the function remains the same, to push us past our limits and into growth. The Japanese have a term for this, trial by ordeal, or shujio, where monks face extreme conditions to transcend their ego. It's no coincidence that so many martial arts myths feature a student battling a spectral opponent in the woods. The monster isn't just an obstacle, it's the gatekeeper of the next version of yourself. But what happens when we refuse the call, when the shadow isn't confronted but suppressed? History offers a grim answer. Repressed desires don't vanish, they mutate. The Victorian era, with its strict morals, birthed stories like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where the proper gentleman's hidden urges erupt as a monstrous second self. In Ireland, the legend of the Banshee, she warns what happens when grief is silenced too long. Her wail isn't just a harbinger of death, but the sound of sorrow finally given voice. So here's the question these myths force us to ask. What monster did you have to overcome to grow up? Was it a bully, a failure, or a part of yourself you outgrew? Because the truth is, we don't just defeat monsters, we integrate them. The courage to face Grendel, the cunning to outwit Medusa, the resilience to survive the lion hunt, these aren't just victories. They're the moments we reclaim the fragments of ourselves we thought were too wild, too dangerous to acknowledge. And yet, some desires are so forbidden, so taboo, they don't just lurk in the shadows, they slither into legend as creatures too terrifying to name. From the incubi whispering in medieval bedrooms to the seductive yuki-ana of Japanese folklore, these beings don't just haunt our stories, they expose the lines we're terrified to cross. Some desires burn so fiercely in the dark corners of the human psyche that cultures can only speak of them through monsters. Take the incubus, that nocturnal demon of medieval Europe who visited women in their sleep, weighing down their chests with unwanted pleasure. This wasn't just a scary story, it was a coded confession, a way to explain forbidden arousal in an era where female desire was unmentionable. Across the Persian Empire, the div played a similar role, a horned, clawed beast embodying unchecked greed and lust, its very existence a warning against surrendering to base instincts. These creatures aren't random, they're the shape-shifting manifestations of whatever a society deems too dangerous to name. Sigmund Freud would have had a field day with these myths. His concept of the ID, the primal, pleasure-seeking part of the mind, finds its perfect metaphor in monsters like the Rusalka. Slavic folklore paints these water spirits as drowned maidens who lured men to watery graves with their beauty and sorrow. But dig deeper, and the Rusalka's tragedy reveals darker layers. Often, she was a woman wronged, jilted by a lover, or driven to suicide by shame, her vengeful hauntings a twisted rebellion against the purity culture that doomed her. In one haunting tale from Ukraine, a Rusalka drags her unfaithful husband into the river, not to kill him, but to trap him in an endless underwater embrace. It's a grotesque inversion of romantic love, where desire curdles into possession. Fast forward to today, and the monsters have traded lake shores for TikTok feeds. The vampire, once a symbol of sexual transgression, now sells romance novels and eyeliner. Werewolves, embodiments of repressed rage, star in teen dramas as brooding heartthrobs. Even zombies, those mindless consumers of flesh, get rebranded as tragic figures in shows like The Last of Us. This isn't just storytelling, it's capitalism digesting our fears and selling them back as entertainment. The div's greed, now it's the anti-hero CEO in a prestige drama. The incubus's forbidden lust, repackaged as a steamy supernatural romance. But here's the twist, when monsters become merchandise, they don't lose their power, they just shift shape. The same desires that once spawned cautionary tales now fuel binge-worthy plots. The real question isn't whether we've stopped fearing these impulses, but whether we've just found slicker ways to commodify the thrill of confronting them. After all, nothing sells like a safe brush with the forbidden, preferably from the comfort of your couch, with subtitles and a snack. So what taboo still lurks in the shadows, waiting for its monster? Maybe it's AI addiction, whispering sweet nothings through our screens, or climate guilt haunting us like a spectral debt collector. Because as long as there are desires too dangerous to admit, there'll be myths giving them teeth and claws, and a marketplace eager to put them on a t-shirt. Hollywood has a way of sanding the edges off our oldest nightmares, turning snarling gods into cartoon villains and sacred spirits into box office spectacles. Take Disney's Hades, a blue-flamed, wisecracking lounge singer compared to the original Greek god, who wasn't some cackling antagonist but a solemn ruler of the underworld. His name so feared ancient Greeks whispered it through clenched teeth. This isn't just creative license, it's myth laundering, stripping deities of their complexity to fit a marketable mold. The same treatment befalls creatures like the Maori taniwha, water guardians deeply tied to tribal lineage and land. When non-Maori filmmakers reduce them to generic CGI serpents in adventure flicks, it's not homage, it's erasure, swapping sacred context for splashy visuals. Director Taika Waititi once called out this trend, joking that Hollywood would turn a funeral dirge into a pop song if it sold tickets. But the issue isn't laughter, it's leverage. When non-indigenous studios profit from Navajo skinwalker lore without consultation, or turn the Hindu Rakshasa into cannon fodder for monster slayers, they're not sharing stories, they're strip mining them. Controversial filmmaker Jordan Peele took the opposite approach with Nope, crafting original horrors rather than pillaging marginalized myths. There's a difference between inspiration and extraction, he noted, pointing to the line where admiration becomes appropriation. So when does retelling cross into theft? Look to the backlash against The Secret of Kells, accused of cherry-picking Celtic iconography without depth, or the uproar when a video game gave the Philippine aswang vampire fangs, a Western trope alien to its lore. The litmus test isn't just accuracy, but agency. Are the culture's gatekeepers guiding the narrative, or is it being drafted into someone else's spectacle? Yet monsters aren't just commodified, they're conscripted. Nations have long weaponized myths to forge identity, like China's dragon, a symbol of imperial power twisted by colonialists into a menace to justify oppression. Meanwhile, Finland's Sampo, a magical artifact from the Kalevala epic, became a nationalist emblem during their fight for independence, proof that legends can rally as fiercely as they terrify. From Mexico's Alebrije, vibrant spirit animals turned cultural ambassadors to Scotland's Loch Ness monster, a tourism goldmine. These beings don't just haunt, they hustle. Which raises a thornier question. When a country sells its monsters, who really profits? For every Iceland leaning into elves to boost sustainability tourism, there's a Greece watching its gods become slot machine themes in Vegas. The line between celebration and caricature is as thin as a Hollywood contract and twice as negotiable. Now consider the ultimate rebrand, monsters not as threats or mascots, but as mirrors. Because when a society's fears shift from the supernatural to the systemic, the creatures that emerge don't lurk in forests, they hide in plain sight. A crimson dragon coils around the Welsh flag, its scales stitched with national pride rather than dripping with the blood of villages. Singapore's Merlion, half fish, half lion, spits water as a tourist attraction, not terror. This is the paradox of patriotic beasts, monsters stripped of their teeth and repurposed as national cheerleaders. But is this cultural celebration or commercial neutering? Consider Bhutan's thunder dragon, the Druk, emblazoned on everything from currency to airline logos. In its original myths, this creature split mountains with its roar. Now it grins from souvenir keychains. The transformation isn't accidental. Nations pluck the most photogenic traits from their folklore, sanding down the fangs until the monsters are safe for parades. Yet some countries wield their creatures with unapologetic ferocity. Serbia's Zmaj, a fire-breathing dragon, wasn't domesticated. It became a symbol of resistance against Ottoman rule, its likeness carved into war shields and whispered about in rebel camps. Similarly, Iceland's trolls haven't been cuddly-ified. Their grotesque silhouettes still guard lava fields, warning hikers not to trespass. The difference is intentional. One culture tames its monsters for unity, another unleashes them as reminders of resilience. Nowhere is this duality more vivid than during Guatemala's festival de Barrilets Gigantes, where massive kites painted with the face of the Kukulkan serpent take flight. The Mayan feathered serpent, once a god of storms and creation, now dances across the sky in paper and bamboo, a breathtaking reclamation of heritage. But at dusk, when the kites descend, older generations still murmur warnings about the real Kukulkan's wrath. The festival walks a razor's edge, honoring the myth's power while threading it into modern joy. This raises a thornier question: when does mascot making cross into myth mining? Japan's yokai, once spirits to be appeased, now star in anime and plush toys. The Tengu, a long-nosed goblin once feared for kidnapping children, adorns sake bottles as a cheeky logo. Purists argue this dilutes the story's gravity. Others counter that cuteness keeps them alive. After all, which child fears the Tengu now? But perhaps they learn its name through a cartoon first, then later discover its darker roots. The debate echoes in every souvenir shop selling Loch Ness monster bobbleheads or chupacabra t-shirts. But pop culture doesn't just soften monsters, it resurrects them. Netflix's The Witcher plucked Slavic leshies and strigas from obscurity, while Tumbad revived India's forgotten Pishocha demons with chilling authenticity. These aren't sanitized mascots, they're nightmares restored to their full, trembling glory. The line between preservation and exploitation blurs. Are we reviving legends or just renting their skeletons for entertainment? Perhaps the answer lies in who holds the pen. When Maori directors helm films about the Taniwha, or Navajo writers craft skinwalker thrillers, the monsters retain their sacred weight. But when outsiders cherry-pick the claws and fangs without context, the creatures become costumes. The next time you see a nation's monster smiling from a postage stamp, ask what was lost and what was saved in the translation from terror to totem. Because somewhere between mascot and myth, these beings are still whispering their original stories if we're willing to listen. The vampire's fangs have sunk into every era, but the bite marks keep changing shape. Bram Stoker's Dracula was a Victorian nightmare, an aristocratic predator seducing women with whispered promises, his bloodlust mirroring fears of immigration and sexual liberation. Fast forward to the glittering Cullen clan of Twilight, and suddenly vampires aren't lurking in crypts but brooding in high school cafeterias, their thirst framed as a romantic burden rather than a curse. This isn't just a shift in aesthetics, it's a reflection of what terrifies or titillates each generation. The vampire endures because it's a blank canvas, adapting to embody whatever we project onto it: disease, forbidden desire, or even capitalist excess looking at you. What we do in the shadows, nightclub owners. But why do some monsters outlast centuries while others crumble into obscurity? Consider the manticore, a Persian nightmare with a scorpion's tail and a lion's body once feared, now relegated to Dungeons and Dragons manuals. Contrast that with the werewolf, a staple from Petronius's Satyricon to Teen Wolf. Its appeal rooted in a universal dread, losing control of one's body. The monsters that stick aren't just scary, they're metaphors with staying power, their core fears eternally relevant. Retellings that flip the script reveal even more. Take Medusa, once a monstrous punchline, now reimagined as a victim turn, avenger in novels like Stone Blind, her snakes a crown rather than a curse. Or the Japanese Yuki Onna, a snow spirit who once froze travelers solid, now recast in anime as a tragic lover. These reboots don't just update the lore, they interrogate it, asking who gets labeled monster and why. Here's a chilling fan theory for you. What if the modern zombie apocalypse is just the golem myth in a hazmat suit? Both are mindless hordes created by human arrogance, one by medieval magic gone awry, the other by lab leaks and hubris. The parallels hint at a deeper truth. Every age molds monsters from its own clay, so which classic deserves a glow-up? The Slavic Rusalka, perhaps not as a vengeful drowned ghost, but as a voice for ecological grief, her rivers choked with plastic. Or the African Adze, a firefly-shaped vampire that could symbolize the sting of stolen resources. The possibilities are endless because monsters aren't relics, they're reflections. And sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't the creature in the dark, but the one we carry inside, which brings us to the ultimate question. If myths teach us how to face external horrors, what happens when the monster isn't under the bed, but in the mirror? The next chapter isn't about legends, it's about you. Every hero's journey starts with recognizing the monster in the mirror, not just the ones lurking under the bed. Think of fear as your personal minotaur, its labyrinth built from the threads of self-doubt and past failures. But here's the secret ancient myths understood. The beast isn't there to destroy you. It's a gatekeeper, testing whether you're ready to claim the next version of yourself. Cognitive behavioral therapists call this exposure therapy, but the Greeks had a simpler term, the trials of Hercules. Each labor wasn't just about strength, it was about confronting what terrified him most, from the hydras regenerating heads to the golden apples guarded by sleepless dragons. Now imagine your anxiety as a shapeshifter. One day it's the Wendigo, whispering you'll never have enough time, money, love. The next it's Medusa, freezing you with perfectionism before you even begin. The trick isn't to slay these creatures outright, that's how you get a Hydra situation, but to name them. Psychologists call this externalization, turning abstract dread into something you can wrestle with. A client once drew her depression as a Dullahan, the Irish headless horseman, because it made her feel unseen and directionless. Giving it form didn't solve everything, but it gave her a starting point. How do I put my head back on? Let me share a modern myth. A writer paralyzed by rejection letters envisioned her fear as a Barghest, the black hound of English folklore said to portend failure. Instead of avoiding submissions, she began feeding the beast not with retreat, but with pages written badly on purpose. Each terrible draft became a bone tossed to the hound, until its growls softened into whimpers. 2 years later, her debut novel featured a Barghest as the protagonist's unlikely guide. That's the alchemy myths teach. The monster you befriend becomes the mentor you needed. Try this tonight, grab a journal and sketch your fear as a creature from legend. Is your procrastination a lazy troll, demanding tribute before it lets you cross the bridge? Is your imposter syndrome a doppelganger mimicking your flaws but none of your strengths? Now ask, what would this beast's weakness be? Vampires hate mirrors that reveal their true selves. Werewolves are tamed by silver, a metal associated with clarity. Your monster might crumble when faced with evidence of past successes, or shrink when you speak its name aloud to a trusted friend. But here's where the ethical dilemma bites. Colonial hunters once shot wolves and big cats to extinction, only to unleash plagues of overpopulated prey. Similarly, slaying every discomfort creates emotional monocultures, people so armored they can't feel joy either. The Maori warrior tradition offers wisdom here. Before battle, they'd perform a haka not to banish fear, but to channel its energy. Your anxiety isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the leshy, the Slavic forest spirit, who misleads travelers only to steer them away from cliffs. The question isn't how to kill your monsters, but which ones are actually trying to save you. So when you stand before your next inner beast, remember, the heroes who only knew how to swing swords became cautionary tales, the ones who learned to listen. They became legends. The sword hovers at the Minotaur's throat, but what if the real monster isn't the one with horns? Western myths often frame creatures as obstacles to be vanquished, their deaths celebrated as heroic climaxes. But dig deeper, and these battles reveal uncomfortable truths. The Minotaur wasn't born a monster. He was imprisoned in a labyrinth for existing, his hunger for human flesh the direct result of Athenian cruelty. Eco-critical scholars like Timothy Morton argue that labeling beings as monstrous often justifies their eradication, whether in myth or real-world conservation, where invasive species face extermination while human destruction goes unchecked. Indigenous stories offer a radical alternative. The Maori Taniwa, for instance, aren't slain but negotiated with, their wrath soothed through rituals acknowledging their ties to ancestral lands. A Navajo elder once told me, "You don't kill a skinwalker, you outgrow its need to haunt you." Consider the Japanese yokai, spirits as diverse as humans, some mischievous, some benevolent. The tengu, with its long nose and winged silhouette, wasn't hunted but appeased with offerings at mountain shrines. Contrast that with European dragon-slaying epics, where victory means hoarding the creature's treasure and mounting its head on a castle wall. The difference isn't just cultural, it's cosmological. One worldview sees non-human beings as part of a web, the other frames them as resources or rivals. Even modern fantasy grapples with this. The Witcher novels subvert monster hunting tropes by having Geralt question who the real monsters are, the creatures or the kings who pay him to kill them. Yet violence against mythic beings isn't always unjustified. When the Norse gods slay the world serpent Jörmungandr at Ragnarök, it's not wanton cruelty but a tragic necessity to prevent the sea from swallowing the earth. The key lies in intent. Are we destroying out of fear, greed, or genuine balance? Post-colonial readings of Beowulf suggest Grendel's mother, a grieving parent avenging her child, was demonized to legitimize colonial expansion into her marshlands. Her monstrosity, like so many others, was a political tool. Now imagine future myths where AI entities or climate change-born spirits demand the same moral scrutiny. Will we repeat the old patterns of demonization or craft new stories of coexistence? Indigenous futurisms already point the way. In Rebecca Roanhorse's novels, Navajo gods and cybernetic heroes share the stage without reducing either to villainy. The next chapter of myth-making won't be about who we slay, but whose stories we refuse to silence. Imagine a creature woven not from flesh, but from corrupted data, a deepfake demon that whispers in voices stolen from your contacts, its face flickering between loved ones and strangers. Or picture the pollution wraith, a spectral figure stitched from smog and microplastics, its hollow body filled with the choked cries of extinct species. These aren't just nightmares, they're the next generation of monsters already taking shape in the collective anxiety of our era. Futurist Dr. Lena Voss predicts the folklore of the 21st century will be written in binary and benzene, where ancient fears merge with modern vulnerabilities. After all, what's scarier than a virus you can't see? one that hijacks your face to scam your grandmother. Space exploration births its own terrors. The Martian dust hag, perhaps, a phantom said to cling to astronaut suits, her breath a static crackle of radiation, her fingers tracing the seals of your oxygen tank. Or the void mimic, a creature theorized by xenobiologists that doesn't just lurk in the darkness between stars, but mirrors human speech to lure the lonely. These beings aren't random, they're the mental spillover of our cosmic isolation, the dread of realizing we might not be the universe's apex predators. But the most potent monsters are always homegrown. Climate grief could spawn the coral revenant, a weeping entity composed of bleached skeletons, rising from dying reefs to drag polluters beneath the waves. Cryptozoologist Dr. Raphael Neves suggests the next chupacabra won't suck blood, it'll siphon lithium from electric car batteries, a manifestation of our guilt over green capitalism's unintended consequences. Even AI, that most modern of tools, might birth its own golem, the algorithmic hungry ghost, eternally ravenous for attention, its body a fractal of viral trends and dead memes. Yet here's the twist, every monster carries a secret beauty. The pollution wraith swirling toxins form hypnotic patterns, like an oil slick under moonlight. The deep-fake demon's ever-changing face becomes a grotesque mosaic of human connection. Perhaps future myths won't just warn us, but help us grieve. After all, the Maori Taniwha began as destroyers before becoming guardians. The same creatures that embody our fears might one day teach us how to live with them. So when the next great monster emerges from the chaos of our age, don't just ask what it hunts, ask what it reveals. Because the most enduring legends aren't about the darkness out there, but the light we forge in spite of it, and that's where the true magic begins. There's a grotesque elegance in the way H.R. Giger's alien arches its biomechanical spine, its elongated skull gleaming like polished obsidian. Every rib, every sinew looks less like a random horror and more like a dark masterpiece, a fusion of terror and artistry that lingers in your mind long after the screen fades to black. This isn't just a monster, it's a moving sculpture, proof that beauty doesn't always wear a pretty face. Across the globe, Maori carvers etch the swirling forms of Taniwha into temple beams, their wooden scales curling like waves, their eyes inlaid with a balloon to catch the light. These aren't crude depictions of fear, they're sacred art honoring the power and grace of beings that command respect, not just screams. Creature designer Carlos Huante, who's crafted beasts for everything from Men in Black to Pan's Labyrinth, puts it perfectly. The best monsters aren't just scarier, they're hypnotic. You can't look away because they're fascinating in their otherness. He describes sculpting a demon's face with care usually reserved for Renaissance portraits, ensuring every wrinkle tells a story of rage or sorrow. Audiences spot falseness instantly, he says. A monster's ugliness has to feel earned, like it evolved that way for a reason. That's why Guillermo del Toro's pale man from Pan's Labyrinth, with his sagging skin and eyes nestled in his palms, feels so hauntingly real. His design whispers of centuries spent hungering in the dark. But what makes us gravitate toward these unsettling forms? Psychologists point to the uncanny valley effect, where things almost, but not quite human trigger deep unease. Yet there's a flip side. When pushed far enough into the grotesque, the revulsion loops back into awe. Think of the Japanese Nyor Anna, a serpent woman with hollow cheeks and hair like wet seaweed. Her face shouldn't be captivating, but when rendered in ukiyo-e woodblock prints, her sorrow becomes poetic. Or the Slavic Baba Yaga, her iron teeth and chicken-legged hut absurd yet mesmerizing, like a nightmare spun from a child's wildest doodles. Even modern gaming leans into this allure. The designers of Bloodborne didn't just want players to fear their beasts, they wanted them to study them. The cleric beast, with its 2 long limbs and antlers like shattered stained glass, moves with a perverse grace, its attacks almost balletic. And who could forget the haunting majesty of Shadow of the Colossus, where each towering creature feels less like an enemy and more like a fallen god. Their deaths aren't victories, they're tragedies. So here's the challenge: which monster do you find strangely beautiful? Is it the tragic elegance of Frankenstein's creation, his stitches a roadmap of human hubris? Or the iridescent scales of a European dragon, shimmering like oil on water as it soars? Maybe it's something subtler, the way the Babadook's Inkai silhouette seems woven from grief itself. Because these creatures aren't just warnings, they're reflections of our capacity to find wonder in the weird, to see artistry in the abyss. And that's why we'll always need monsters, not just to frighten us, but to stretch our imaginations beyond the mundane. They're the shadows that make the light more vivid, the chaos that gives order its meaning. Without them, our stories would be smaller, our world less alive. So the next time you glimpse something monstrous in the dark, don't just shudder, look closer. There's magic in those teeth. Monsters aren't just the things that go bump in the night, they're the shadows we cast when we hold up a light to our deepest fears. Neil Gaiman once said, "Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten." That's the alchemy of these creatures. They take the formless dread of the unknown and give it teeth, so we can learn how to fight back. Think of the bedtime stories whispered to children, where the wolf is outsmarted or the witch is outwitted. These aren't just tales, they're training grounds for courage, teaching us to face the dark long before we ever have to. But monsters do more than scare us, they shape us. Every culture's boogeyman is a mirror of its values, a way to enforce the lines we dare not cross. The Furies of Greek myth didn't just punish oath breakers, they carved justice into the collective imagination, turning abstract morals into something visceral. Even today, zombie apocalypses and rogue AI narratives aren't just entertainment, they're cautionary tales about consumerism and unchecked technology. These stories force us to ask, what happens when greed outpaces ethics, when creation turns against its creator? Monsters don't just reflect our fears, they refine our morality, sharpening the boundaries between right and wrong. And then there's the sheer, wild creativity they inspire. From the intricate carvings of Mauri Taniwa to Guillermo del Toro's labyrinthine creatures, monsters push art to its limits. They're the reason we have Gothic cathedrals, gargoyles, and cyberpunk dystopias, why a Japanese yokai can be as mesmerizing as a Renaissance painting. There's a reason Mary Shelley's Frankenstein endures not just as a warning, but as a testament to the beauty of the grotesque, the elegance of the unsettling. Monsters remind us that creativity thrives on the edge of comfort, in the space where fear and wonder collide. So here's the truth we've been circling. Monsters aren't just out there, they're in us. The jealousy that coils like a serpent, the anger that roars like a werewolf, the grief that wails like a banshee. These aren't flaws to eradicate, but forces to reckon with, to integrate. The heroes we remember aren't the ones who slayed every shadow, but the ones who learned to dance with them. Now it's your turn. What mythic creature lingers in your imagination? Is it the cunning kitsune, the mournful La Llorona, or something else entirely? Share it in the comments, because every monster we name is a fear we've begun to tame. And as the screen fades to black, picture this: a single, glowing eye in the dark, blinking slowly, not in threat but in recognition. The monsters were never the enemy. They were the teachers we didn't know we needed. From the flickering shadows of ancient campfire tales to the glow of modern screens, monsters have always been more than just stories. They're the ink blots of our collective psyche, revealing the shape of our deepest fears. We've traced their footprints from the blood-soaked claws of Grendel to the pixelated glitches of digital demons, watching as they morph with each era's anxieties. Yet beneath every fang and fur, every scaled spine or spectral wail, there's a reflection staring back at us. The vampire isn't just a night walker, it's the fear of time stealing our vitality. The zombie isn't merely a shambling corpse, it's the dread of losing our individuality in a crowd. These creatures are mirrors, cracked and distorted, but mirrors all the same. Take a step back and the pattern becomes undeniable. The same societies that trembled at wolves under the full moon now sweat over algorithms that track our every click. The parents who once warned children about the Baba Yaga lurking in the forest now fret over the strangers in their DMs. The monsters haven't disappeared, they've just traded cloaks for Wi-Fi signals, adapting to haunt the new frontiers of our fear. Even our bedtime stories have upgraded. Instead of whispering about the boogeyman in the closet, we binge-watch dystopian series about societal collapse. The stage changes, but the script remains eerily familiar. Here's the unsettling truth we've uncovered. The real monster might not be lurking in the dark. It might be the very structures we've built to keep us safe. The bed itself, with its promises of rest, becomes a prison for insomniacs. The smartphone, designed to connect us, twists into a vortex of comparison and anxiety. Modernity's greatest irony is that our shields often become our shackles, and the things we create to comfort us can morph into the new generation of beasts. The Minotaur's labyrinth wasn't just his prison, it was ours too, a maze of our own making. But there's power in this realization. When we name our monsters, when we drag them into the light and dissect their origins, we strip them of their terror. The Navajo skinwalker loses its grip when we recognize it as a manifestation of envy. The AI overlord feels less imminent when we see it as a metaphor. FOR Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Every myth we unravel is a fear we disarm, a shadow we illuminate. So thank you for joining this journey into the heart of darkness, not to dwell there, but to light a torch. If these tales have resonated with you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the stories that shape us. Together, we'll keep pulling back the curtain on the things that go bump in the night, proving that even the fiercest monsters shrink when faced with understanding. After all, the oldest magic isn't in the wand or the spell, it's in the act of naming. And now that we've named them, these creatures don't just haunt us, they belong to us. The next chapter isn't theirs to write, it's ours.